Thank you very much for joining into the Fighting Talk 2 YouTube channel and the subsequent podcast that will follow it. Today, I've got Paul Jarman from Back to Basics Therapy, and we're just going to be talking about how recovery and massage and that kind of stuff before fights and after fights can improve the fighter's performance. And we're just going to have a little general chit chat and go from there, really. So, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself and tell me what you do.
Hey, Connor, thanks for having me. I'm Paul. I'm a company called Back to Basics Therapy. We are a holistic and remedial therapy company providing alternative and complementary therapies using a combination of Western and Eastern medicine to mainly elite level athletes, but we do see general population people as well.
Nice, fantastic. So, what actually got you into massage, and specifically massaging MMA fighters? And I think you do a few boxes and stuff as well, don't you? But what kind of got you into doing that instead of the traditional Swedish massages and stuff? Where you're just lots of oils and stuff like that. What got you into doing the rough side of it?
Well, I actually started off with holistic massage. That was my first introduction. It's a long story. Essentially, my sister was ill for a few years, and I was a bit fed up with the way doctors were kind of just brushing her off. I say doctors, GPs. We're kind of brushing her off and only treating the symptoms. So I started looking into anatomy, physiology myself. Found I had a bit of a knack for it, and just excelled from there. Basically, I looked into a few courses. Some holistic therapy, some sports therapy. They all kind of made sense based on her condition. Decided to dive in, do a course. I never intended for it to be a professional thing. It was always knowledge-based, and I just wanted to understand a bit more. Mm-hmm. And I haven't stopped since then. We're talking about 8.5 years ago.
It's a long time. It's a very long time.
It's a long time, and every few years I find something new that really excites me about the industry. I started off with holistic massage, which is, great. It's not quite Swedish, but it's not quite sports. Mm-hmm. I went into sports remedial therapy and then sports therapy. And then I moved on to like Chinese medicine and Tuina. That one, thanks to my wife, she suffered a bit of a back issue at one point. Mm-hmm. And nothing was helping her, and that was the only thing that helped.
Yeah, for sure. Because obviously we first met each other probably about 4 years ago now, after I broke my ankle, and then I was training at London Shoot Fighters anyway, where you're based, and I just needed to get on the road to recovery a little bit quicker. Obviously, I was a lot bigger back then as well, and got in touch with you, and you managed to get me on the road to recovery super quick. I think they kind of said I would be healed after 12 weeks, but you managed to kind of get it down to about 8 or 9, which, and then we've always stayed friends from there, haven't we? I think us both being, me being a chef and you having been a chef before, I think you kind of have a different level of respect for someone, and you can talk about different things straight away. I think that's why we kind of kicked it off pretty early. Exactly. So what's it like being in the gym and being around kind of like high level MMA fighters?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's definitely a different environment to be into to others. I've worked at a couple of spas, a couple of places, and it's definitely unique in its in the environment feel. I don't know if anyone who's watching this or listening to this has ever been into a gym. Hopefully you all have, that's why you're listening. But there's definitely a very close-knit community in most gyms. So when you're working with these guys, and this is their job, this is their livelihood, this is their passion. There's a lot of pressure behind getting them to where they need to go, especially when it comes to injuries and recovery. We have to make sure that they don't panic about the smallest things, and that the bigger things are dealt with accordingly.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, Michael Page fights out of London Shoot Fighters. And he's quite a big name in the MMA community anyway. So when he comes in and says, "Paul, I've got a little niggle here and there, is it going to stop me fighting and stuff like that?" It must be a lot of pressure on you to get him fighting fit, for instance, and get him ready for a bout.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, there's a lot of pressure when you're treating big guys, like big names in the industry, like Michael Page, John Hathaway's, Derek Chisora's, all them. There's always a lot of pressure because that is what they do, and they're expected to perform. So you need to make sure you get them there. I think every camp has a pressure, every camp, because you go in not really having some major issues, and at any moment something can happen. So you're always on the ball, you're always on alert, you're always on call, and it's a lot of pressure. Luckily, like for top end gyms, you get a team, and the whole team have to perform, from the coaches to the physios to the athletes themselves. And if any one of them falls short, then the rest of the team have to pick up the slack. So it's quite intense, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine. You just said about Derek Chisora. I know we did a few questions before this, and we had a few things we were going to talk about. But because you said about Chisora, what do you think is there a massive difference between kind of getting someone ready for a boxing bout over getting someone ready for an MMA fight? Obviously there's different body parts involved and stuff like that, but would you use similar techniques? Because obviously boxing is a lot more shoulder based, whereas MMA is obviously a complete kind of body exercise, isn't it? So do you think, is there a massive difference between the two?
Not a massive difference, but definitely a difference. I mean, MMA, yeah, you're right. It's more of a well-rounded situation, because if someone has a foot injury or a knee injury, it's going to completely impact their performance. Whereas, realistically, boxers can get away with it. Mm-hmm. Although it might hinder their movement a bit, they can still get away with having a knee injury or an ankle injury or something. The techniques are the same. It's just depending on what we actually have to do. Your neck, shoulders, lower back is always a thing, mm-hmm. on both sides of the fence.
And would you say they're the most common injuries along, in fighters in general would be the neck and the back?
Neck, back, elbows, and ankles.
Okay.
In all sports, those are the most. People think knees and stuff. Knees are general across the population.
Yeah.
But in sport, I find those are the things I have to deal with the most.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the so going along from that, what's the worst kind of injury you've seen or had to deal with, from a fighter perspective, whether that be like a cut during camp or something like that, or just an injury in general?
Oh wow, big question. I've seen so many. I mean, it depends what you define as the worst, because I've seen dislocations, broken bones, broken noses, people suffering slip discs. You're right, cuts as well. They're all severe injuries. You can't really say or identify one of them as worse than the other, because they all have an impact. But I think the ones that cause the most damage are definitely kind of like anything that's broken. So if someone breaks a foot or breaks a toe, mm-hmm. Fractures something, that definitely hinders their performance throughout a camp.
Yeah.
And that really, we have to do a lot of remedial work. Just to
course.
try and get them to the fight, because these guys, they're very driven to their goal, and they won't stop even if they're injured.
Yeah, I guess a broken toe is pretty entry level when it comes to MMA, because obviously throwing kicks, you're going to get checked. People end up with broken toes all the time. I think we saw in the Khabib fight, he actually caught his toes in the cage, and as he rolled backwards, he broke like 3 of his toes during the fight. I think that between toes and fingers are probably what's going to go first. Would you say that was right?
I'd say toes and elbows. Fingers, they don't really. There's a good protection around them, especially if you've got the hand gloves, the mm-hmm. wraps on stuff. I think elbows and toes are definitely the most vulnerable. You get someone in an armbar, half a second too late and it's gone. Toes, you're always bouncing, twisting, pivoting, kicking. There's always pressure on them. So they're definitely the most vulnerable, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So what about the recovery process then? So as soon as so one of the fighters, they step out of the octagon, they've got numerous injuries, they've banged and bruised and everything. What's kind of like your first port of call to get them back into the octagon or get them back into the cage or ring, whatever it may be, as quickly as possible? Is there some sort of, full MOT that you do? You go through the whole body top to toe and then kind of work out what you need to do and then set a plan from there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm of the mindset that prevention is always better than the cure.
Hmm.
And you know, most camps, if we're lucky, will be a 12-week camp. So we work with these guys throughout the whole camp, 2, 3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week, up to the fight. So after a fight, anything that needs to be dealt with is not actually that severe.
Hmm.
Um, the trick is to maintain these guys moreover than trying to rehab them or catch up with an issue that might present itself. Um, I mean, they've always got little niggles. They've always got little things that need to be dealt with. But they usually brush it off. They usually don't come to me after a fight. They have their little holiday, and they take their rest, and they come back, and a few weeks after being back, they'll say, "Oh, yeah, after the fight, I had this and I had that," and then we just have to start the process again from there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
absolutely,
we do,
absolutely.
we do.
Go on,
Sorry,
sorry.
we do like full MOT. So we do assessments pre-fight, pre-camp, manage anything during the camp. After a camp, we reassess everything,
Hmm.
making sure that nothing has worsened during the camp. Nothing, you have to dig with these guys sometimes because they don't like to tell you about their injuries sometimes. Just because it doesn't play on their minds. It's
Yeah,
there, but it doesn't play on their mind. But it's relevant. It's always relevant. So after a fight, they might say, "Oh yeah, I slipped in the cage. I done this. I done
yeah. I guess that's a
that."
very fighter mentality as well.
Very Spartan mentality. Exactly.
Yeah,
Carry on, keep fighting. These guys are warriors, and you know we can't expect anything less from them.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The mentality out of London Shoot Fighters is like no other I've ever seen.
Oh, shoe
You're in there,
fighters is
you're bleeding no matter what.
different.
I remember you were telling me about Amir. I think Amir caught a knee to the ear, and I think didn't his whole ear just flap off one time?
Man, yeah. So he had his ear basically ripped off. It was like I think it was like 70% ripped off. Like he had to go get the plastic surgeon to sew it back on. He was out for a few months for that. But yeah,
Yeah,
it was
I remember talking about that. That was pretty gruesome at the time. But do you think injuries sustained in camp are avoidable? Obviously, a lot of people are moving on to kind of like the Max Holloway kind of approach of like doing Zoom sparring and that kind of stuff because so many more people are not doing as much sparring in camp now. But do you think that doing less sparring in camp would result in less injuries, or do you think sparring in camp is crucial to the fight?
I mean, you definitely sustain less injuries, but it's crucial to the fight that you do spar because how can you mimic a fight if you don't fight? How can you practice, your takedowns? How can you practice your transitions if you don't practice it? You can't mimic an environment of a cage, an octagon. You can't mimic an environment unless you put yourself in it. So you definitely avoid injuries, but then you lose progression if you do this Zoom sparring, for example.
Yeah.
If you don't have a team pushing you, if you don't have a team, correcting your mistakes, you're going to fall short every time.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
I'm with you. I'm with you. I suppose there's probably a lot of different views on that as well.
Yeah.
From fight perspectives and different bits and pieces. But it's definitely something that I'd love to talk about further in the future.
Yeah.
Also, I was wondering, we've seen a lot of ever since kind of like the Olympics a couple of years ago, a lot of people had the cupping therapy, and I
Yeah.
think Michel Pereira had lots of the little suction cup things on his back over his previous fights. I mean, we've done a bit of cupping ourselves, but do you do you need to tell everyone what kind of the approach of cupping is?
Okay, well, I mean, it's quite varied in its approach because it's quite an ancient technique. So you've got hip cupping that stems from ancient Egypt to Aboriginal tribes to, I mean, it's used very commonly in Islam. as a religious kind of practice. They use it to detox before Ramadan, and they use it to take out toxins and other things from the body.
Okay.
In Chinese medicine, it's kind of used for, we call it stagnation. So where the body might be stuck in a way. So you've got fascial tightness, muscular tightness. You're not getting enough blood flow. So cupping is just another tool to help encourage movement of these fibers to allow your body to heal. But I mean, there's a lot to cupping. People think it's just putting a cup on the skin and leaving it there. If you're getting a treatment like that, you're getting ripped off, in my opinion. It's a tool, but it doesn't account for the injury. So, for example, you have someone come to you, and I've had some people come to me and say, "Oh, I have sciatica. Can cupping help?" Well, I mean, yes, but only if it's used right. You know, if I put cups on you and you go buy your own cupping set and put it on your back, it's not going to help. But you have to have an assessment. You have to find out why you have sciatica. You have to find out the root cause, and then maybe cupping can be a tool that you use to help adjust that cause.
Yeah, I'm with you. And then what about I've seen loads of pictures on Instagram and stuff. People get cupping, but there's loads of blood in the little cup. Is that a similar technique to cupping, or is that an advanced technique of cupping?
So, I mean, it's a different technique. So, it's called bloodletting or hijama in the community, Islamic community. Sorry, it's a way of removing toxins or stagnated blood from an area from the body instead of allowing the body to flush it out itself. So, for example, let's say it's in hijama, the Islamic process of taking out blood, they will use it to detoxify the body. They will use it as a system to remove something called jinn, and you stick to it quite regularly. You know, once every couple of months, they'll get hijama just as maintenance.
Okay.
In old England, and I think in St George's Hospital, they still use like leeches for taking out toxic blood or from operations. So if you've got operation, you've had some plastic surgery, they'll put leeches under the scarring, and that will help keep the blood flowing, and remove anything that's kind of hanging around, all those let's say bad blood, toxic blood, stagnated blood.
Sure.
And then in Chinese medicine, they use it more for removing, let's say, disease from a direct area. So say, for example, you have athlete's foot. You've tried the herbs, you've tried the massage, you've tried the steroid creams. Nothing's working. Well, they'll just remove the blood straight from the area. So it's very varied in its usage, and it's not the application. What's the word? In its theory of application.
Sure.
You know, depending which part of the world you're from, you use it for a different reason.
Yeah. So a lot of these techniques that we've spoken about, they're all very, very ancient techniques, and the Tuina that you do as well, and that you kind of like specialize in, is a very ancient technique. But all of these things they all kind of come back around like fashion and stuff like that. We all dress like people did in the 70s and the 80s or whatever. So what do you think the next big thing is in therapy and, you know, massage therapy and stuff like that? What's the next big craze?
Oh, wow. Craze. I don't know. I mean, I've seen
stuff, for instance.
Say again?
Like the cryo stuff. Everyone's kind of jumping into ice cold water, or they're going into a, you know, minus 250 degree room and stuff like that. Is that the next big thing?
No, I don't think it is, actually. I mean, cryotherapy is definitely a big part of any sort of team sport, a big part of rehab and therapy. I think it's used slightly wrong, in my opinion. But the cryo chambers that you see, these cryotherapies that you see, they're actually just the next level of the ice bath. So instead of you having to have an ice bath, you can just go stand in a room and have a similar effect. It's more convenient. It's definitely more accessible to a lot of people. I don't think it's the next big trend because it's already kind of used. I mean, if you look at NFL teams, they do it all every day. You know, after every game, they have cryo cuffs. So they've got cryo leg braces on them after every game. They've got the medical team have, you know, shoulder cuffs and wrist cuffs, and you know, cryotherapy is not new and it's definitely not trending. In regards to trending, something I have seen, which is quite interesting, is this hammer and chisel technique.
Okay, that sounds pretty medieval. I don't think that's not a new technique.
It's become more popular by a guy, Dr. Bu Hightower. He treats a lot of UFC guys. He's created a bit of a fashion statement out of it, but it's actually an old Thai/Malaysian technique of bone setting. And I say that because there's no evidence to suggest that it sets bones. But the research on it does suggest that it has similar effects to acupuncture, light acupuncture. And I don't know if you've ever seen a chiropractor. They have a little gun, little pencil thing, and they click it, called an activator. The activator is just an updated version of that hammer and chisel. So I think that's going to trend a little bit if it hasn't already.
Is that something that you're well versed in? Do you know how to do that kind of stuff as well, or?
I do, yeah. I pride myself on being quite a generalist. I like to know a lot about a lot, and it's something I do use. Like I've used it on, I found it very useful on a lot of ankle techniques. One of the guys who was quite an interesting subject to try on was James Haskell.
Mm-hmm.
He had top physios looking at his foot and everything, and he had a couple of operations on it, and I used this technique a few times, and we progressed significantly in just a couple of treatments. And I think if you go to one of his YouTube videos, you can see me performing on him.
Oh, nice. Bit of name drop in there.
Oh man, I'm just telling you how it is. You know?
Yeah, you got to do it. So, all right. So we'll wrap it up now, Paul. But where can people find you? And what's the best way to reach out to you if they are in the West London area, or around London, they want to come and get some top therapy from the Ginger Genie? How are they gonna get there?
My ginger brother. So my website is www.back2basicsTherapy.com. It's the same for my Instagram and my Facebook. There's a booking system on there and contact info on there. Based in Alperton at London Shoot Fighters, Park Royal at the Quick Recovery Unit, and actually at a clinic, a Chinese medical clinic in Kentish Town. But if you go to my website, you can find all the information there.
Amazing. Nice one. Well, Paul, thank you very much for jumping on the chat with me, and I really appreciate it. But you're also a cut man as well, so we'll be doing a little show about how it's like being a cut man and the pressures regarding that as well. So we'll be seeing you in
45-second anyway. Pressure. Yeah.
Say again.
45-second pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot you got to squeeze into 45 seconds, right?
Exactly.
Nice one. Well, thank you very much, Paul, and I'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you for having me.